Hey everyone, thank you as always for tuning in to Art Ed Radio. Today's episode is going to be coming to you from the archives. It's an episode about using humor and dealing with student immaturity. And I wanted to get the humorous episode out there because we've been doing all sorts of great things with humor, both in the magazine and the community this month. Magazine has had some great articles, community has had some great discussions about how we use humor in the art room. We'll link to those so you can check them out, so check the show notes for that. And then this episode, it's an old one, so those of you that are new here, I used to have a co-host with this podcast named Andrew McCormick. Great guy, great teacher, great host. So when you hear Welcome to Art Ed Radio, but it's not me, okay, that is Andrew. He's hosting the episode. I am the co-host for the episode, but when you hear his voice, don't be too shocked, but it is a good episode, all about humor. I thought it fit in well, and I hope you enjoy it here today.
Welcome to Art Ed Radio, the podcast for art teachers. This show is produced by the Art of Education, and I'm your host, Andrew McCormick. You know, we've all slogged through it. Some days it's heavier than others. Some classes are worse than others. Usually Fridays are bad. Forget about the days before a big holiday break, and holy cow, avoid full moons. I'm talking, of course, about student immaturity, obnoxious, rude, and inappropriate behavior. Just as Tim and I have said that creativity is the currency in which art teachers trade, immaturity is the currency of our students. We all have varying stances with these antics. Some of us will see them as an innocent or maybe even a little bit of a funny thing. Maybe it's a way to lighten the class mood or even build rapport. Others are going to see these as a huge distraction that can completely derail our class and undermine everything we're trying to do as art teachers. So let's talk some specifics on how to deal with these dirty talking antics. Number one, I think we need to find and discover our own threshold for what's immature and offensive. And then we need to communicate that clearly to our students. Number two, we're going to talk about how we develop some tactics to diffuse and sidestep some of these pitfalls of immaturity. And three, I'm going to pose this question if mastering student immaturity and how to deal with it is actually a way that we can build rapport with our students. So at my very first job, a veteran teacher once told me, "Don't let them get your goat. Don't even let them know where you keep it." And to me, this has always spoken to not letting things bother and affect me. But that works up until a point until it does bother you. And then you have to be very clear and consistent with your students that something that they are doing, something in their behavior is not appropriate. And we have to deal with all of our students in a fair, consistent, and transparent way. And we have to keep at it. I mean, it's easy for students to lose sight of their job, and their job is to make awesome artwork. So a simple reminder, individually or even to the entire group, redirection of class expectations is going to go a long way on improving and vanquishing some of those immature attitudes that you don't appreciate. There's a great article that I just read on Edutopia called "Clowning Around, There's a Comedian in Every Classroom," where it discusses how to diffuse and actually work with the class clown. And let's be honest, we all have them. Shoot, I actually was one for pretty much my entire life. In the article, it basically says, rather than meeting these students head on in a confrontational way, we need to think about how to leverage the students' natural desires to perform and get that limelight and turn it into a positive and creative outlet for them. If we meet these students with scorn and ridicule and anger, we give them what they want: a stage, an antagonist, us, and an audience. Checkmate. They have everything they want. So instead, think about flipping it on its head and leveraging that to a more positive and creative solution. So next I want to talk about the two tactics that I use to avoid some of these immaturity, rude pitfalls. And they are using humor myself and front-loading. With front-loading, I know when and where I'm going to open myself up for all sorts of ridicule and laughter. And I can, right off the bat, kind of tell students, here's what I don't want to see, here's what I do want to see, and here's my expectations. Appealing to their sense of maturity, despite how slim that actually may be, goes a long way. Something like, I know you guys are old enough and mature enough to handle this. Let's take, for example, the inadvertent student discovery of nudity in an artist's work. I do try to steer clear of deliberately showing artist examples of nudity because I figure there are millions of other artists and examples that I can show without even going there. But it does sometimes come up as students are doing some of their own research, and we can handle this in a mature way. Students can sense if and when you're squeamish and uncomfortable about things, and they're going to react in kind. So be upfront, be frank, be honest. Don't make something a bigger deal than it actually is. So secondly, I use humor. I figure let's fight fire with fire. I make fun of myself all the time. My students know that I don't take myself too seriously and I have a good sense of humor, but that there are lines that we don't cross. I can joke with my students, I'll sing, dance, act goofy, and honestly, I think that this has diffused much of the students' temptations to be overly stupid and goofy in the classroom because I'm already kind of doing it in a more appropriate and respectful way. They don't have to do that. They see the lines of what's acceptable and they rarely, if ever, cross it. All right, finally, and this is the tricky one, I want to talk about if you can get really good at harnessing and leveraging student immaturity, it actually may be a way to build rapport with your students and create a warm environment and show your students that you're a human being and you have a sense of humor. Listen, fart jokes are pretty much always going to be funny. If I ever get to a point in my life where a well-timed toot doesn't elicit a little chuckle, put me out of my misery. It's not the end of the world if, as a teacher, we say something totally stupid, by mistake as we're apt to do, and a student responds with a well-placed zinger. That's funny. We can go ahead and laugh with them. Let's not make a big deal out of it. And then we can quickly pivot and get the students back on task. This shows that you connect and that you care about your students while also still holding them accountable. So with immature students, what we're really talking about is classroom management. If you feel like your classroom management skills could use a little boost, and let's be honest, who couldn't use a little help in this regard? I know I could. I recommend checking out AOE's course, Managing the Art Room. Now, Managing the Art Room is a 2-credit course, and it begins at the first of every month. And a cool little fact, all AOE courses are offered every month. So if you've got a crazy summer, and I know that I do, then you could maybe get your continuing ed units or grad credits in September or October, which is really cool. So head on over to theartofed.com and check out Managing the Art Room and all the other great courses under the Courses tab. So now let's bring on Mr. Immaturity himself, Tim Bogatz. Tim, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. That's kind of a questionable greeting, but we can go with it. That's all right.
Yeah, so hey, we're talking lewd, crude, and the mean and obscene. So right off the bat, let's hear a horror story. One of your worst or most funny moments of lewd, crude, inappropriate behavior from your classes.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know that I have anything funny necessarily, but I think the biggest thing for me, probably the most awkward, inappropriate moment, was the first time I ever tried to teach kids to pull handles for ceramics. Right. So, you picture what that looks like with a room of high schoolers, and it became a really uncomfortable situation really quickly. And, I didn't even think about that at first. I was just like, oh, I'm going to show them how to do these beautiful handles. Our mugs are going to look spectacular. And it definitely did not go as planned. And just all these weird glances between kids. And it was awkward. And even, after the demo was over, after class was over, I had a couple girls come up and just tell me how uncomfortable they were just watching boys watching them while that was going on. And it was bad news. And I actually ended up recording a video for AOE for the magazine, showing some alternatives, different ways to pull clay handles, because that didn't work for me with high schoolers.
Yeah, I could see that happening. And, you're kind of already alluding to one of the things we're going to talk about, which is kind of knowing when we're going to venture into some whoa, Nelly kind of moments.
Right,
How to circumvent that. But I want to share one of my stories. And I actually think we have kind of we'll depart ways on this a little bit, because I actually think some of my most inappropriate moments are probably like my own fault. Like I think sometimes I create problems and then I've got to deal with them. But, I used to teach elementary classes, and I think some of my favorite stories are from my elementary days. And anyway, I was teaching a 4th grade lesson with colored pencils. I don't really remember what it was, but I had this rule, which was 3 strikes and you're out. Whereas, like, if you can't get your pencil sharpened on the 3rd try, like, give it to me and I'll do it. And I had this little dude in the front row, and his name was Austin, and he gave it to me, and he was all frustrated. He's like, So I sharpened it, and I wiggled it, and I got it right, and I gave it back to him, and he just looked totally amazed. He's like, how'd you do that? Like, all frustrated.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm magic. He's like, no, really, how'd you do that? I'm like, no, really, I'm magic. And then he's like, nuh-uh. And after he said, nuh-uh, I don't know what came over me, but I was like, I'm going to shoot lightning bolts at this kid. So imagine like the Emperor from Star Wars when he like shoots the lightning bolts. I stomp my feet and I shoot lightning bolts out of my fingers. And I kid you not, this kid let out the biggest fart in the world I've ever heard as I'm doing this. And the look on his face was just sheer terror. And he actually like kind of grabbed his pants a little bit. And I pointed at him. I said, "That's right." And I like walked away. And I just let him live the rest of his life thinking that I could induce farts out of him. So, and it's like, with that, I mean, the whole class erupted and they're laughing. So
that's amazing.
There's certain things I don't miss about my elementary school days, but having some fun with some kids and being goofy right alongside them is definitely one of the things. So that does actually bring me to a point that, sometimes I think, I'm part of my own problems. So I might need some help from you. Let's talk tips and tricks, like ways that we can get around it, ways that we can avoid it. Like, what are some things that you do to kind of circumvent this inappropriate behavior that we might see?
Oh, I don't know. I think the biggest thing for me, honestly, is to, I guess, be more proactive than reactive. Because I think so many times we talk about, what do you do when, this kid would say this? Or what do you do when this kid acts like this? Okay. But what we need to think about is, how do we keep the kids from doing that in the first place? Like, how do you avoid those comments? How do you avoid those actions? And if you can kind of, cut them off before they even start, I think that's the biggest thing. And so, like I said, just being proactive about it is really good. Where, let's say we're going to be thrown on the wheel. Okay. And, there's all sorts of inappropriate stuff there with, we're going to get things wet and open hole, just, all the stuff that, like kids are going to make jokes about. Right. And so before that even starts, I like to just talk to them like, hey, here's what we're going to do. These are some of the things that we're going to be saying. However, okay, I need you to focus on this. This is why I'm teaching you this. Okay, and this is the language that, potters use. Okay, and just kind of give them the rundown of what's going to be coming and tell them what your expectations are. Mm-hmm. Before you even go into that. And so generally I've found that if you sort of pre-teach that and just say, as I'm doing this, I expect you to do this. Okay, it can really help, I guess, get the behavior that you're looking for with kids. And then secondly, for me, I don't necessarily want to be condescending with my kids ever, but those inappropriate comments, I'll break that rule because I hate it so much when kids are being inappropriate or being immature. And, I will just look at them and just say, you are not nearly as funny as you think you are. Just something I don't know, like dripping with vitriol, like just give them that look and tell them how much I hate that. And generally that stops things in its tracks. So, I know I should probably be a little more patient with it. And, I'd love to have more fun with it like you do, but that's definitely just not in my DNA. So I try and cut it off before it begins. And, if it does happen, just deal with it swiftly and deal with it pretty strictly.
Well, I think you're right there in that, the notion of DNA, but, something to keep in mind. We also teach different age students. So, like, I have kids who are like 13, 14, and you've got more your 17, 18, 16.
Right.
So, it's kind of the difference between high school and middle school. And, as a middle school teacher, if you meet too much of that inappropriate behavior too confrontationally, too head on, then you become like the one, pebble in the river that's defying all odds. And it's just like, man, I am getting stormed over here. So at some point you got to kind of roll with it a little bit. And I know I've mixed up about 4 different metaphors there, but sometimes you got to know like which battles to pick and when to step in. But I do agree with you that I think, preloading and front loading and being like, all right, we're going to look at some artists that have some nudity in it. And oh my God, shock of shocks. Like at the age of 15, we ought to be able to handle that.
Right.
And if you preload it ahead of time, it's probably not an issue. Now, one of the things that I've noticed that I do, and I think there's something about ceramics. It sounds like both you and I, it's like ceramics is our downfall when it comes to student immaturity. I think it's semantics. There's too many words.
Yeah.
Too many
there really are.
There's too many like goofy boys that are just like, oh, he said finger. It's like, I gotta talk about a finger if I'm talking about, like, how am I gonna make a pinch pot without talking about a couple of these things? But I found myself saying, like, make sure that you apply enough water to the posterior side of the ceramic sphere.
Right.
And then you can put your digit inside of the opening. And it's like, oh my God, it just sounds like such a scientific analysis of what we're doing because I found there's like...
You've sucked all the life out of it at that point.
I mean, I kind of have. And honestly, this is a little meta here, but like my kids kind of know what I'm doing because I even get that like fake stuffy voice, like I'm putting my digit inside of the... So they know why I'm doing that to avoid saying the words like hole and finger and bottom, and it's like, oh God, just, but it's kind of funny, and I can kind of make a joke out of it. So, that brings me to this idea. It's kind of a fine line to walk about rapport and how, if you could maybe harness some of the immaturity, some of the inappropriateness kind of to our favor. Does it show that we're kind of more human? Is it, showing that we're cynical, that we've got a sense of humor, or do you just like not even play that game at all and not even venture into that?
Yeah, that's a good question, actually. And I think it's something that probably every teacher needs to think about individually, I guess, as far as what you permit and, what you can go with. Because for me, like I said, I don't have a lot of patience for that. But at the same time, you don't want to be a stick in the mud. Like,
Right.
if something happens and your entire class is laughing, you don't want to be standing there with your arms crossed being like, guys, this is not funny. Guys, there is no humor in this situation.
Right.
You really need to go with it. And I guess the line for me is, whether or not the inappropriate behavior, action, words, whatever, whether that's intentional or not from the kids. Okay, because sometimes funny stuff happens and you can just go with it. But other times when kids are trying to be inappropriate, trying to draw attention to themselves, trying to get the class off track, okay, I don't have a lot of patience for that. And so that's where I'm going to be strict. That's where I'm going to draw the line. But like you said, if something funny happens, like you do need, well, me at least, I need to roll with that. You need to have some personality. It's a great time to build rapport with your kids. But I guess the intention of it is where I draw the line.
Yeah. I think the line I draw is, okay, if a kid's inappropriate or funny or immature or off task, all of these things that we kind of don't want, is it affecting just that kid, or is it affecting the entire classroom? And if it is affecting the entire classroom and our entire learning environment's compromised, I need to step in and stop this right now. If it's one kid being goofy and he's only kind of hurting himself, I'm going to let that ride out. I'm going to let it play out, but I'm not okay with it. I'm going to talk to that kid and say, like, here's why what you're doing is wrong, and I don't want you to do that, and here are my expectations. But when it becomes an entire classroom, it's like a lot more swift and severe, and like, we're knocking this junk out right now. So, that gets me to another kind of thing to think about, though, because I've censored music that I've played in the classroom. Like, okay, we're not going to play that hip hop song because it's got some content that's inappropriate, even though personally in my own life, I might listen to that and not think twice about it. But, and when I tell my kids, like, hey, we're not going to listen to this, we're not going to look at this artist, or you're not going to say that, they'll say, like, but we do it in our own lives. So that gets me to think about, like, the pop culture and visual culture that our students are already using. Do we as teachers need to, like, think twice about bringing that stuff in when it can lead to immature and inappropriate behavior? Like, how do you navigate that?
Oh, I think there's a couple ways to think about that. First, I don't think you can be afraid to bring anything in. Like, if it can teach a good lesson, I wouldn't shy away from it because, again, it goes back to kind of my first point that I talked about. We're just pre-teaching expectations and behavior. Say, hey, this artist does these things and some of it may be offensive to people. Some of it may be inappropriate, but we're looking at them because, and give them the reasoning behind it and let them kind of know what kind of lessons that you can take from it. And then the second part of that is, just having kids, I guess, know the context and know the audience of, where their work is being presented. Like, the things that you do at school are different from the things you do at home. And just like you said, like, what you're doing at home, what you're listening to at home is not what you can listen to at your job. Like, those are not one and the same. And so if you can teach your kids about the context, the audience, the placement of whatever they're doing, whether that be the music, like you said, the artwork that they're creating, the artwork that you're looking at, I think it's important to kind of teach them how to deal with, those sorts of issues in different situations.
Okay, so that brings me to my final one, and I think this is going to be kind of a slow pitch softball for you to knock out of the park.
Okay.
Do you think then that immature, inappropriate behavior is like the curse of teaching older students, or do you actually think that it provides us an opportunity as teachers to work with them a little bit on these things?
I'm going to go with both. I think I don't know if I'd call it a curse, but it can be really annoying. Like I said, I don't have a ton of patience for kids who are really trying to get class off track and work really hard to be immature. But, at the same time, like you said, it is an opportunity to teach them a little bit more about, how to behave, how to deal with these issues, how to deal with these situations. And it is a good chance for us to kind of teach them, and hopefully they can take that, beyond the art room.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, man, I agree with you because I think, art teaches so much more than just art, more than any other classes, grit, determination, focus, learning from failures. And some of that is also, behavioral. So, you're not focused right now and you're being goofy and off tasks because, not to poo-poo, core classes, but it's like, do this worksheet and stay busy, where it's like a little more open-ended. I think there's plenty of opportunities for kids to be immature and inappropriate, and then we can coach them through like how to deal with that better,
Yeah, I think that's a really good point.
Yep. Well, hey, man, thanks for coming on, and thanks for letting me tell one of my favorite fart joke stories.
Yeah, that is a great story. That is classic. So,
all right, we'll talk to you later, man.
All right, thank you.
Bye. So I think it's clear that Tim and I have some slight differences in how we view the severity of student immaturity. I kind of see it as a way, if harnessed correctly, to build rapport with your classroom, where I think Tim is a little bit more of a nip it in the bud type of teacher. I think we both agree that which we promote. There's that old adage with teenagers that if you give them an inch, they'll take a mile. And that definitely can be true. But we can and should, as teachers, be more savvy than that, and we should know how to corral our classes back in. So an occasional joke, okay, that's fine. But if you don't know your class well and you don't know your environment that you've created, it could morph into something more serious and destructive. You could actually be creating a toxic environment in your classroom. So be careful and deliberate with how you deal with student immaturity. Confrontation and a my way or the highway approach to little childish things isn't going to work, and it may very well alienate your students. Sure, you've got obedience and difference, but at what cost? At creativity's cost? At students' investment and excitement's cost? I'm not willing to make that trade-off. So always keep in mind what we were like as students, and that immaturity is actually a great opportunity to teach what proper focus and respect in arts and in life actually looks like. How boring would it be as a teacher if all you had were perfect, well-behaved students? We need those immature students to teach us patience and better sharpen our teaching craft. Anyone can teach the great kids, but a truly great teacher teaches all kids. Art Ed Radio is developed, produced, and supported by the Art of Education with audio engineering by Michael Crocker. All right, thanks for listening, guys.